Hello everyone, I just wanted to give a quick introduction to this video because I'm trying to link quite a few things together that I've been building up to over the last few videos in this series talking about blues and connecting it to Indian classical music. It's taking me a while to actually fuse all these ideas really clearly together, and I'm also contrasting it with jazz as well. So stick with this video if you want to find out more about this, because I'm trying to give real examples of the differences and the similarities between these styles, and a bit later in the video I go into more of the rhythmic style of improvisation and how that changes in these different styles of music too. So stick around, and this is a bit of a deep dive, but I think there's some good stuff in there for those of you that want to find out more about the intricacies of jazz, Indian classical music and blues, and how are they different and how are they similar. Okay, thanks very much for watching and enjoy the video.
Hello and welcome to this video. My name's Jack Jennings. So in the last video I was talking about blues and why actually it has a different kind of aesthetic to jazz. And in this video I'm going to actually explain why that actually points it more towards a similarity with Indian classical music in terms of the values that I feel both of these styles share. So just to sort of recap, I was talking about how what we tend to think about when we think about great blues players, we tend to think about the way that they use the ornamentations to decorate their line. So for example, a blues player could just be playing, you know, just with a few notes, and it's not just the notes that I'm choosing, it's how I'm approaching those notes. If I'm doing certain kind of vibrato, if I'm kind of like slowing down and suddenly speeding up, or the different trills and different microtonal. You know, different microtonal bends or bends with lots of vibrato. These are the kind of things that we would listen and go, oh wow, you know, that was a cool blues line. That guy knows something more about blues, you know. So these kind of things that, you know, you hear Jimmy and the way that he's phrasing is just so unpredictable and kind of organic, and blues is actually kind of quite abstract when you really think about what you're hearing. If you tried to write that down, or you tried to really conceptualize, or you tried to teach someone to actually play those, you know, to copy those exact movements, it's actually very kind of unpredictable and strange kind of style of playing. But we're so used to it because it's just blues, and it's so popular. It's been so popular for decades. But it's actually a kind of it's quite an abstract kind of style of playing in a way when it gets quite far out. And people like Jeff Beck, obviously, you know, that he's kind of more at the weird end, but he's basically just like a blues player who's just taken it a bit further. But jazz, for example, I mean, jazz can be completely off the wall and avant-garde as well. But the way that we look at a jazz player and say, right, well, what makes you a good jazz player? It's usually, now by the way, I'm not a jazz player, so I can't demonstrate this really, but the way that we look at jazz lines, it's often the way that the permutations of the line work, the sophistication of like the melodic shape and how it has lots of different combinations of intervals, juggling up the intervals. So it's not just like a linear form, it's more, you know, it's kind of jumping around to different registers, or doing octave displacement, or using arpeggios or inverting arpeggios, not to mention the fact that we'll be moving between different keys and implying different harmony. So you're playing a melodic line, but you're implying a chord that's maybe come out of a different scale. All of these kinds of things. And by the way, I will get onto Indian classical music, and because I've been building up to this for a few videos, it's kind of difficult to try and connect all this stuff together, but I'm building up to talking about how Indian classical music shares some of those values that we were talking about with the blues playing a moment ago. But just for example, for jazz, So if I tried to play something, I'll just be using the D major scale, but if I tried to play something but with more like interval jumps and maybe different inverted arpeggios and things like that, maybe you'll get the idea of what I mean. I'm not much of a jazz player, but I used to play like that a bit more sometimes. It's interesting stuff to do, but I'm thinking about maybe using a bit of an arpeggio and then sort of, using a line that's maybe in the middle of the register, but then sort of jumping up and having these sort of changes of direction. And making it much more varied in terms of like its melodic shape and these different sort of constellations of the notes. I'm not so much thinking about all the different expressive techniques like I would if I was playing all these different little ways to like pinch the notes and make the vibrato a bit different, or do a bend that's different, or slide in and out of that note, or those other things that would make kind of blues playing come alive a lot more. So now to talk about Indian classical music, the thing that I would say really signifies it is that it's that importance on the ornamentations. So, for example, in the alap of Indian classical music, the alap is when we just have like a sitar or vocal, for example, with no tabla, and it's just all in like completely free, open time, and we have these kind of So I'm not actually doing anything in terms of the shape of the melodic line. And I mean, when I say shape of the melodic line, it depends what level of distinction you're talking about. Because do you mean shape in terms of like if you were to plot the notes on the keyboard or on the musical stave? I'm just going maybe up to the third note and then back down to the fifth note. I'm kind of just going. If you were just to look at the pure notes that I'm playing, I'm not really doing much in terms of actually the bigger shape in more of an expanded form, the shape of the line. It's more that I'm spending time with each little junction of notes. And if you were to zoom in at the melodic shape, so look at all the different permutations from one note to the next and the little ways that the notes are joined together, there you would find the real complexity of the melodic shape. So, for example, things like I do it a short bend and then a quick bend, or something like. Doing these small bends that then, like a bend that goes up to the second and then a tiny bend up to the flat third, and then kind of quickly moving between those and then into like a longer bend afterwards. So I'm focusing so much on just how I'm going to articulate those notes. I'm not really thinking about how I'm going to contrast those notes, and again, I'm playing on one string because it makes you focus more on the ornamentations between the notes. So for example, when I took the more jazz approach, where we were sort of doing things like an arpeggio and then sort of jumping around the notes a lot, it's not like that kind of thing at all. I mean, even if I was to do something faster, I mean, first of all, if I did sort of jumping around, then you'd see how different that is, because with the Indian music, we doing little things like these kind of things. If I did jumping around like, obviously that sounds quite silly on one string, because it's almost like I've taken an Indian approach to an instrument and I've kind of pasted on a kind of jazz thought process in terms of like jumping around, and you can hear how it's like the shoe doesn't really fit, But if I try to do something that's more flowing, more kind of rhythmic with Indian music, because we've looked more at the kind of the things that would be done in a kind of open sense of time with no rhythm, like when you're just kind of floating. If I took something that's more rhythmic, like I tend to be thinking more in little groups of notes. So I'm thinking more about moving in quite a linear way along that one string, because that makes you think more like a singer, more like a singer, or like a sitar player. So moving along that sort of linear way, but being more thoughtful about how you're sort of grouping notes together, so that there's a sort of rhythmic strength that they have. And this really connects to the conical, the South Indian system, where we do things like takadimi, 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 da takadimi, da takadimi, 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 da takadimi, da. So you're doing things where you're joining, threes and fours and fives, and things are kind of slotting together, in a very sort of regular way. But the kind of groupings, the rhythmic groupings that you're doing, are sort of motivating, like how they're helping you to orientate how the line is being put together, and you'll also be maybe following the structure of a rag when you have particular combinations of notes that you're using on the way up and the way down. Whereas when you're doing the kind of jazz approach, it was more like the choice of notes was actually what was inspiring me more. How I'm going to choose to highlight the seventh degree, and then I'm going to do maybe a bit of an arpeggio, and then I'll come down, and then I'll highlight that seventh degree again. And it's the note choice is very, very important, because obviously that's looking towards the shape of the phrase, and then the different maybe target tones of different chords that you're going for. So actually this video is starting to feel more like I'm talking about how Indian music is different from jazz. But in a sense, the way that Indian music is different from jazz is a similar way to how blues is different from jazz. Blues is more, focused on it's the ornamentations within the phrase that are the most important thing. I think when they start to go into the more rhythmic phrasing, that's where Indian music and blues are actually quite different. I think all these three different styles that I'm kind of exploring here, they're all very different when you go more into the rhythmic side, because a lot of blues rhythmic playing is really so physically, it's influenced by how your hand feels on the guitar, and the kind of things that fall into the hand. So different rhythmic phrases. So blues, trying to play more kind of blues driving rhythm. Usually you fit into a kind of like a triplet thing, and it's got to have this sort of rollingness, and it's often really built around just the things that are suiting the hand in that kind of box shape. So it's a lot of these like kind of very muscular things that you kind of build into your hand, and putting those bends and things in there, and those different accents on the pick strokes. So it's all about how the phrases are sort of locking in together, and you have like a very strong sense of vocabulary, and it has to have a strong emphasis. So the kind of rhythmic approach. But the other thing about that is that, again, it is actually quite linear. You are moving kind of often through a scale, but instead of just going straight up and straight down with the playing each note the same, it's like different notes will be accented differently. So you're putting in these different little trills or bends or slides or like harder pick strokes, but again, I'm not jumbling up the notes. I'm not doing big jumps and things like that. They're just kind of mostly consecutive, just moving straight through the scale. But it's blending different techniques into that, so it speaks differently as it moves across the scale. So with Indian classical music, again, doing rhythmic improvisation, in a sense that it has that similarity. I mean, we get a lot of these like different groupings in Indian classical music I was talking about earlier, but you can have different things like so it's something quite similar about that, because as I'm moving around, there's a kind of regularness to it. Often the rhythms of Indian classical music, when you start playing like that, a lead line, often the lines are quite long and continuous, and kind of often quite consistent rhythm, but I'll be changing the ornamentations as I'm going. Sometimes a slide, other times a bend, or like a repeated bend. You might be noticing again that there's more groupings in there. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. So different groupings in there, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, So more repeated patterns a lot of the time, whereas like I was saying blues earlier, blues can actually be quite abstract, and you repeat patterns in blues, you repeat them in some places, but you often repeat them just in a place where it works in the box pattern, where so much of it is down to the physicality of the hand in blues. So I might repeat this in that place, but then you probably wouldn't repeat it. You don't hear that very often. You don't hear repeating it going down. You don't really hear blues players do that because it sounds too formulaic. Blues doesn't have, I mean, it does have a formula, but it doesn't do like repeated patterns kind of moving down the scale in such a sort of systematic way. Unless, I mean, of course, Jimmy Page did these kind of things like these kind of things, or so you do get some sort of systematic things like moving through the scale. So there aren't any absolute rules here. Of course, it's music. People can do what they want, but these are just the different things that, for me, kind of highlight the connections. The first one again was about Indian music and blues really having ornamentations, the accents on the notes as their kind of lifeblood. And usually the greatest musicians that are most respected in both styles, in their respective styles, are the ones that have their own kind of expressive language that they've built into it, and it's like the little tiny things that they do to the note that no one else does. So it's not really about kind of being clever so much. It's about like the soulfulness of it, like very, very, deep, soulful approach to the music. Of course, Indian music does have an intellectual root as well, which is very, very prominent. But at its essence, it's got that heartfelt, sort of deep, soulful root that obviously blues also has that as its kind of fundamental value. The fundamental values that they share, that's kind of what I wanted to try to explore more today. This has been quite a difficult video to make because I'm just trying to pull together a few different things and try to sort of explain the unexplainable in a way, because all of this stuff is so much just about the sounds.